Aunt Doris.
Right.
But this is what I'm confused about. Maybe you can I don't, because I was born so late, and Mama said that Aunt Elsie went with her to the doctor, and no, Aunt Doris went with her to the doctor.
Yes.
And when they told her she was pregnant because she was 45, she said, I would rather he have told me he was going to take me out in the front yard and shoot me than I was pregnant. Oh, great. Thanks.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And then she wouldn't tell anyone in the family.
That she was pregnant with me. So here I'm this little, Mama's trying to get Clarence ready for prom and calling on Elsie crying because I wanted a bottle and I was only like 3 months old and all this kind of stuff. So here I tagged along over here. I was over hanging out with Norma and all of them because they were all older and
we were the babysitters.
Yeah, I was over here. But I didn't ever, and I was always over to Aunt Elsie's because I didn't have any grandparents. And Aunt Elsie was like a grandmother to me. And I saw like Lisa and Kathy and all them over there, and I'm like, well, I wanted to be my grandma too.
That's the way family was.
I would sneak off.
Family took care of family.
Oh yes.
I would sneak off all the time and go down there, but I never understood, and I never asked David. So, like, Uncle Horace Hansford, that was married to Aunt Elsie, Mama's sister, he worked for the railroad, didn't he? Do you know? Where did I get that from?
He was totally a waterman all of his life.
All right.
Where did I get?
So, let's start. You tell us now who you are and how you're related.
And tell me about Uncle Horace, because I always thought that for some reason he worked for the railroad and then had seafood stuff.
And you tell us who you are, how you're related, and then just start from the earliest you remember and just start telling the story.
Norma Ahner. I was born and raised in Seaford, 1944. My parents built this house in 1946, and I've been here permanently since 1982. My Fox Hill grandparents were Alfred and Ellen Johnson, and I had an aunt, Virginia Clark, and an uncle, Joe Johnson. All of them are deceased. There's only four. I'm sorry. There are 3 Clark children and 3 great-grandchildren in Wisconsin that were Joe's children. And I have one distant cousin who was my granddaddy's sister's children. That's all that's left of the Fox Hill family. And my grandparents are, yes.
So we're related we're related through Fox Hill for sure.
Yes, we are, because my daddy came to Seaford with the Rowe boy, Eldridge Rowe, I think, and one of the Holsted boys that lived in Fox Hill. They were working up this way, and so my daddy came up here because the fish camp burned in Fox Hill. And so he came up here and he got a job working down at the fish house. And he was going back and forth. And then one of his first cousins, Mrs. Betsy Johnson, was marrying one of my mother's cousins, Wilson Hogg. And they needed someone to represent the side of the family in the wedding. And so Mother was in Wilson and Betsy's wedding and went to Fox Hill for the wedding and met my daddy. And he said, well, I'm working up there going back and forth a couple days a week and staying nights wherever we could stay, you know. And so they hit it off. And she quit school when she was 18, and of course back then you couldn't get married unless your parents signed for you, and my granddaddy would not sign for her. So that was in 36. So she and my daddy continued to date. He'd go back and forth to Fox Hill. He went in the shipyard. He worked the shipyard during the war. He was a pipe coverer. And that's was his downfall, because when he died with what was green moss on the lungs, which today, if they were to, it's asbestos poisoning. But they didn't know anything about it back when he passed away. But anyway, they waited. She turned 21 on the 6th of December in 39, and they got married on the 9th. And he built a brand new house in Fox Hill.
This is a good story.
Down on Clark Road.
Right.
And it was a 2-bedroom, very much like the one that we've got here. Of course, this one's been added on to. But
And didn't Mama and all them go down there?
everybody went down and helped decorate the house and got it all ready. And they got married at Nanny's. And then they went to Richmond for their honeymoon, come home, packed up a few things, and went to Fox Hill for the wedding night, for the 3rd wedding night. And she got upset. She got to crying and carrying on. She didn't want to live down here. She didn't know anybody down here. As my daddy said, she cried all night long. So the next morning he said, pack your suitcase. And she said, why is that? He said, we're going to Seaford. And they come home, and she never went back.
Wow.
He brought her home.
He brought her home.
Yeah. Mama always told me that
Mama,
story.
Nanny, and Hudson and all of them went down and packed up the house and moved her up here. There was an apartment in the old house over here on the corner at Woods Road, which was would have been my great-great-grandmother's. And
so were you related to Floyd Thomas?
no.
Okay. All right. I didn't know if there was a connection there.
Was that Mama and my grandparents' house on the corner?
No. The one across the street was Big Mama's house.
Oh, Stroud or the house next to it?
The house on the corner. Where
And I'm
they just
related-
put up the fence.
I'm related to Stroud's too.
Oh, the old where Donnie Childers lived.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I know what you're
There was
talking
2 apartments
Yeah,
there.
I know.
Dr. Powell's son
Right.
had the ground floor apartment, and Mom and Dad took the upstairs
about. Corner
apartment.
Woods and Rock Creek.
And that's where they were living when I was born, but then they moved to Nanny's because I was such a bad baby.
Oh boy.
Well, I was the first one, and everybody was living at Nanny's, Hudson and Marguerite and everybody, and I've always been a night owl. I never like to go to bed, and I don't sleep a whole lot, and so they used to say they passed me from bedroom to bedroom. When one would get tired of putting up with me, Hudson would come get me, or Granddad Nanny would come get me. But anyway, they got married, and they were married for, I don't know. But anyway, he passed away in 1969.
And I remember him, even though I was only like
He was 7 years old.
7 or 8 years old. I remember Uncle Ashby.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he was the sweetest thing.
Yeah, well, he worked in water until I was in the 1st grade. And Jerry Mills and Wesley Mills were getting ready to sell out down here. Jerry had already left. And Wesley was more into the big boats and going up north to Gloucester and all during the summer months. And my daddy had done that. In fact, the summer before I was born in September, my mother went to Gloucester and stayed up there the whole time. Of course, all the families around here did. All the Millses and everybody went to stay the summer in Gloucester, Massachusetts. So anyway, he never went back on the deep sea trawlers after the Ocean Clipper burned up. They were coming back from Gloucester, and they made it as far as just inside of Cape Charles, and the engine caught on fire, and it sunk. But fortunately, the ocean breeze was right behind them, and they rescued all of them. They didn't lose anybody. And so that's when he started doing the fish runs on the Lilith, and had a black man that worked for him, Howard Lockley, He was Locke to me. He helped raise me. In fact, I can tell you a really good one. We used to go, and he cooked my breakfast mornings when we'd go and cross York River.
Mm.
And one morning he bought me my breakfast. It was toasted eggs and all, And he said, "Now I got something new for you this morning," and it was brown jelly, like. And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Oh, it's good. You'll like it. It's apple flavored." So he fixed me a piece of toast, and I raved about that brown jelly. That's all he ever called it. He said it was apple flavored brown jelly. So I kept after my mother, "Please get some of that brown jelly." Well, what it was apple butter.
Mm.
And so one day, Mother said, "All right, Norma, Bill Wernham has finally gotten it. It's apple butter." I said, "Oh." And I still love apple butter.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But
it tasted better on that boat in the mornings.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it did. Sometimes it was mighty rough, too, going across York River.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, we were close friends with the Hudgens family up in New Point. We used to go see them like maybe twice a summer because it was an all-day trip to leave here and go across the ferry and go up to New Point and eat lunch and spend the day and then come back.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the business got really slow and he decided to leave the fishing industry and went to work at Fort Eustis. A man that was living in the house that David Freeman lives in, Jim and Lil Hartley. Jim was in charge of the post engineers over at Fort Eustis. And he told Daddy, he said, "I'll get you a job."
Mm-hmm.
And so my daddy went to working on engines at the post engineers. And he was there until he retired in 66, I guess it was. Same year I graduated from Longwood. And so on the Hansford side of the family, my mother's side of the family, she was a Crockett. My grandmother was a Crockett, Horace and Elsie Crockett Hansford. My granddaddy, Horace Hansford, was part of the Hansford clan group that bought the land from the Stroud family all along the right side of Landing Road, all the way to the creek shore.
Mm.
In fact, the Stroud family, the Mills family, Hansford family cemetery is at the very end of the street.
Okay.
To the right. And Alec White lives there, and he maintains the little foot marker that's there. Because the original cemetery, it's mainly children, and my great-great-grandparents on the Hansford side were buried there. But it became a parking area when that was a fishing party dock.
So there's not a lot of headstones or anything?
There's no headstones.
No headstones.
No
All
headstones.
I remember when there was a dock down
Now, I had the history of that cemetery.
So I didn't know there was a cemetery there.
It's just, like I said, it was mainly babies. And
Okay. Mm-hmm.
so Nanny and Granddaddy Hansford, they got married in, Mom was born in 18, so they got married in 16. She was 15 years old.
the year Mama was born.
Mm-hmm. And Nanny and Granddaddy, and Mother was born in 18, and then Hudson was born in 22, and the youngest, Jeanette, was born in 29. She's 95, and she's still going.
All right.
Very active, as much as she can be.
And was the Jeanette boat named after her?
No, the Jeanette boat was actually the Janet.
Well, it's spelled Janet, but everybody used to pronounce it Jeanette.
I know. But
I worked on it as well.
Well, but it was, we called him Bubba Wilford, but it was Wilford Crockett.
Okay.
His daughter's name was Janet, too.
Okay.
And that's where that name, it was on that side of the family that name came from. No, Norma Jeanette was her name. And of course, when I came along, I was going to be Norma Jeanette. But then my mother decided that she needed to represent the Johnson side of the family, and she named me after my grandmother, who was Ellen Marion Verlanda. So, I mean, my tree goes to the northern neck as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, but Nanny and Granddaddy had the 3 children. They built the house. They moved in it in 1920. And it was there until
Just not too
a
long
month ago.
Yeah.
And of course, we had sold the property after Nanny died because it was just too much to keep up. And a couple bought it, and they built this new house here.
Mm-hmm.
But Granddaddy Hansford was part of, I don't even know his first name. And Anna was Granddaddy's mother. And they divided this land up over here. Granddaddy was the oldest, and then there was Julia, who was Julia Hansford Mills, and they owned the point where the original Anna family was born and raised.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vernon, we called him Jug. He lived up here at the corner of Parker Lane. And then there was Uncle Rob Hansford, who was Bobby's, Bobby Hansford.
Mm-hmm.
Well, his daddy was,
Thelma's son.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Rob was my granddaddy's youngest brother.
I have all of that on a family tree on Ancestry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And so then, of course, all this land, Granddaddy owned all of this, from that house, the middle lot, and this lot.
mm-hmm.
And then Julia owned the next all the way to the creek and where Hansford Court is.
Mm-hmm.
And Uncle Rob didn't want, he wanted to move in this area because he lived with my mom and daddy and with my grandparents when he and Thelma first got married. But she wanted to live closer to her parents down on where Miss Bessie's house was.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't take a piece of land, and Uncle Verner didn't want one because Aunt Josie was, her family was up off of Parker.
Mm-hmm.
So Julia and Horace got all of this land, and it was eventually divided. My mama got the first piece, which goes all the way to the water. Then Uncle Hudson got the piece back on the waterfront, but that was after Wesley Mills had the cove dredged so that he could get his yacht, because he owned a yacht at that time, up to the end where Sandra is, where that little basin area is there. So all the mud, that was dredged out, came from up there, and they spreaded it all along this side over here. So they made all the land down around Hudson's house and down at my end and next door. All that was man-made. It was, the tide line originally was, well, almost where Hudson's barn sits.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so then Miss Julia, of course, her and George Mills, and they had Wesley, Anna Virginia, and Olive. Well, Anna Virginia had married and moved to Hampton, separated and moved back home and was living with them. And then Olive got married Jimmy Hogg. He was also in the water. He was in the Navy. When he come home from the Navy, he went to work for Wesley, and he was a captain of the Ocean Breeze and then the Gulf Stream.
I guess he was related to Ernest Squinch.
No.
Oh, they weren't? No. Okay.
No, he was from up in Harris Grove area. He was a Gloucester Hog.
Okay.
And while he was in the Navy, they got married, and she lived in an apartment down here where Gale Acres is. And then Miss Julia gave her as the first to get married, this piece of land here. And they built this house. The same contractor that built our house, my house in 46, built hers in 50. And then, so Uncle George used to farm all that other land over there where Hansford Court is. And of course, he was a boat, he basically did wintertime fishing. I mean, winter crabbing and dredging and all.
Mm-hmm.
And then Olive and Jen, Anna Virginia, continued to live with Arnie and Uncle George. And then Wesley, of course, built the big brick house. And that was built in the 40s.
So, can we get into, your dad and his boat and the different boats and who owned them and who was working them and any of that you remember?
Well, I remember my dad only had the Lilith. And then he had a little 18-foot bateau that we used for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
But mainly, I mean, he never owned a full boat he worked a full boat,
right,
other than going back and forth to collect for the fish company. My granddaddy, Horace Hansford, he worked for C.E. Crockett, but he was always a fisherman. He dredged in the winter, and he went to Cape Charles from April to November. And he had a fish camp along the banks of the Chesapeake.
And he owned the kingfish.
He owned the kingfish. And he didn't use the kingfish during the summer, though.
Right.
He went over. We took him to Old Point Comfort every Sunday night, and he caught the steamer and went to Cape Charles, and he kept a car over there. And he boarded at different places over there, and then he had the fish camp, and of course it was set up. He could stay right at the fish camp, but most of the time he came out from the fish camp.
Where they fishing pound nets.
They set pound nets, yeah. And all of February and March, we used to ride out every Sunday afternoon to look for pound poles. You had to look for pine trees that were like this.
Yeah.
If they were this or this or this, no.
So were those fish camps, were they the ones that were those little houses that were sitting over there in Cape Charles? I remember riding over there when I was little. And I thought that they were I called them like a fish house. I thought that's where they brought the fish in from the boat.
No, these were down on the beach.
Yes.
In fact,
I remember riding over
part
there.
of Kick-to-Peak State Park covers the area that was the fish camp. And you could still go down, what's that family's name? I can't think of it. He has a seafood place there on 13.
I know there's Heaths and...
No, the Heaths is who he lived with. What was that other family's name? They were in Cape Charles, and they had a fish house in Cape Charles. But anyway, you turned left and went down past what was later the Coast Guard station. That's how you got there. There wasn't because the roads that connect now didn't connect back then. But
so he only had the kingfish.
He only had the kingfish. Now
it's pretty much the same way it was in Fox Hill on Grandview, the fish camps.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the wintertime with kingfish, wouldn't he still go over to Cape Charles and drudge crabs out of there too?
He drudged crabs all over the bay.
Yeah.
But during the summer, we took him on Sunday night. That was our outing every Sunday afternoon. 4:30 we had to go because the boat left at 6:30. And we'd leave there and go by West End Drugstore and get an ice cream cone. That was our treat,
Yeah.
What about, I've always been curious, and since you know all of this, and, I've never been able to sit down and listen to a lot of this, is what about, Uncle John, Uncle Paul, and Uncle Travis on Elsie's?
They were all brothers and sisters.
Right, I know, but what did they do? What boats did they
They were
work?
all watermen.
I know, but do you know what boats they all worked on?
Yeah. Uncle John was on the Janet.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
talking about Sharon's dad.
Yes.
He
Yes,
owned
and
the
he was
Jeanette,
my
yeah.
uncle. He was
The
Mama's.
Janet.
He was Mama's brother.
Yeah, he was your
He
uncle.
was my
Right.
uncle.
And Uncle Travis was, well, he started on the LCK.
Right, named after
Which-
Mom and Aunt Elsie.
Right, which was one that burned eventually.
Oh, I thought that was what was the weird name boat? It wasn't like a woman's name.
Clay.
The Clay. I
No,
thought
the
she-
Clay was Uncle Paul's.
Okay.
And Uncle Paul was the transfer boat. He went to Cape Charles every morning and picked up the load of fish and then brought them back. And he'd get back to the dock down here, C.E. Crockett's, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And they'd unload him and pack out a truck. And there was a company out of North Carolina, Mr. Evans, that used to come up every day and pick up a load of fish.
Didn't they have like that wharf, that concrete wharf down there or something?
They had
On the
well,
barge.
it
is
was a
where
barge.
they had one.
yeah, and then
I
they had
barely remember going
and
down
they
there.
built little extra docks beside it, and they would stack them like 3 across. Yeah, and
Who
then,
owned Walter Boyd? I know Eddie ended up owning most of them, but did anybody have Walter Boyd before him, or was he the one that owned it?
I don't remember
Okay.
So
because see, my dad left in 50,
Okay.
and so some of those boats came in and were used after.
Right.
So I kind of lost touch with that.
And in the 40s, I know there were as many as 50 deck boats here on Back Creek. So there was a lot of them.
Oh yeah,
Because Ernie Squinch, he had the Sam.
yeah. And
You remember
Harry
the
D.
Sam?
Albert had one, and Captain Otis had one.
Yeah, his
And-
was the Alice Glenn.
Yeah.
hmm
There's somewhere, somebody posted a list.
I've got the list. I've
Of
put
all
it on
the
there
boats.
before.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. But anyway, Granddaddy, and then he'd fish all week, and on Saturday morning, Uncle Paul would make the run over to Cape Charles, and Granddaddy would come home
Mhm.
on the Clay.
Mhm.
And they get here about 1 o'clock, and he always brought this big bucket of fish with him.
Mhm.
I could see my grandmother standing in that backyard cleaning fish every Saturday afternoon.
Mhm.
And of course, we would have fish Saturday night. During the winter, we'd have fried hard crabs.
I remember having fish in the morning. Mama used to go get them out of that thing in the garage.
We had
Salt tin.
saltfish on
Mhm.
Sunday mornings.
Yes, with fried the bacon grease on them and make those
Well, that was the only way they cooked
what was
them.
those cakes?
Yeah.
The potato was it potato cake?
Potato cakes.
Yeah.
Corn cakes, potato
cakes,
cakes. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you did all your cooking on Saturday except for frying the chicken. All your vegetables were cooked on Saturday. You didn't do any cooking on Sunday other than brown the biscuits in the oven and fry the chicken.
Mhm.
Everything else was prepared on Saturday.
Mhm. Yeah.
So my grandfather, who's your
Your grandfather was my great grandfather.
right, Captain C.E. Crockett. So he owned what?
He owned that side of the
He
road.
owned this side of the road,
And
and he gave
he and your grandmother, Miss Edna's family, the Strouds, owned that side down to where Mr. Ernie White picked it up. And of course, the White family owned from Miss Mary's old house over here all the way down.
So how is Ernie related to Harry? Harry White.
It was 2 separate families.
Two separate? Because I know there was Harold White, and he
Harold
was
was
separate.
Captain Ernie's
Son.
son.
Okay.
It was Edward and Harold was the only 2 boys.
Okay.
Only ones in that family. No
Mhm.
girls.
Did you know John Mann that used to live down here?
Yes.
He was my mother's uncle.
Oh, well, if you were to, You could take this whole area, all of York County,
Yeah.
and put them together. You couldn't find 3 people that, unless they were move-inners, that are
Come
not
here's
related.
now.
I mean, when I was teaching at York High School, there used to be a joke. They used to say, "Don't talk about that kid. It may be Norma's niece.
Yeah,
It
right.
may be Norma's cousin."
Yeah, she
Yeah.
taught me history, and I'd be like, "Hey, Norma," and they're like, "Oh no, I'm supposed to call her Miss Johnson."
Yep.
I can remember that. But like Uncle, this is the question I have, because like Uncle Travis, I'm confused. I never got this whole story straight about Uncle Travis, because
All right, Uncle Travis married.
who was he married to first?
He was married to Evelyn Hogg.
Okay, is she the one that lost her leg?
No, that was the second marriage.
That was Irene.
Evelyn and Bet. You remember Bet Shields?
Mhm.
And Dolores Harlan.
Yeah.
George Thomas Hogg.
Yes.
It was like 6 or 7 of those Hogg family.
But he was married to her.
He was married to Evelyn.
But they didn't have any kids.
They had 2.
Oh.
Evelyn had Janice, and then like 12 years later, she had Carrie Thomas.
Oh, that's right. That's Carrie's dad.
Yes.
Okay, so that's Carrie's dad.
Uh-huh.
And then she died.
She died in probably 61,
When I was born. I don't know.
62, something like that.
And then he married Irene.
Then he married Irene Owens,
Owens, the
Mr.
Owens-
Alfred Owens'
okay.
daughter,
Mm-hmm.
ex-wife.
And then didn't she lose her leg or something?
Yes, she had diabetes really bad, and she lost her leg.
That's how the Owens came in, because when we were trying to get all that property straight and getting all them to sign all that stuff.
And he grew up in Dandy, Alfred.
Yeah.
Well, Uncle Travis lived in Dandy.
Yeah,
And so did
when
Uncle
he
Paul.
married, he gave the house, the old house in Hornsbyville, to Carrie Thomas.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And
And
then
Janice, of course, had built a house over here on Warnham Drive.
Right. And then Uncle Paul had the house right there on the water and lived right next to that fish place.
Yeah, because he married Rosa Dawson,
Right on.
who was in the Dawson family that owned the crab.
Mm-hmm.
And
Crab House.
Right,
Yeah.
right there. And I remember going over to their house.
They were next. They built the house next door.
And he used to have those big crab dinners or cookout or something. We'd go over there.
Yep.
I was really little. I barely remember that stuff.
Well, yeah.
But I still do.
I mean, I was what
Y'all didn't,
18 years old when you were born.
y'all didn't call it a crab picking back then?
No,
I'm just kidding.
fish fries. We
Yeah,
used to have fish
yeah.
fries. My mom and daddy had a little shack down here in the end of the lot here that had been my grandmother's chicken coop. And Mr. Eddie Gibbs come up here one day and hooked on
That was a cousin of mine.
yep, and pulled it across the field and set it on stone bricks down on the point down there, and we called it the Lone Pine
Lone
because it
Pine.
has one big pine tree beside it. And my mother turned it into a little kitchen with a porch built around it.
Mm-hmm.
They have
And
fish fries.
we had fish fries and family dinners and
Yeah.
Their family dinners. And I'd see them all down here, and I'd be up there riding my bike and everything, and I'd crash it and show up. You remember?
she'd come running across the field because it was all open land. I mean, you know, and my daddy started cutting all the grass when he went to work at Fort Eustis because he got through the auctions and all, one of the old lawnmowers with the cycle behind it that you stood up and they cut the parade fields and all with. Well, he got one of those and he started cutting all the land, all the fields around here.
Yeah.
So,
So look, you were talking. You brought up earlier that you knew my daddy working at the fish house. What do you remember about any of that? Or,
Claudie,
yeah.
I remember Claudie being working, and I remember when he was going with your mom, Miss Beecham,
Mm-hmm.
and yep. And John Holston was very good friends with me, and we went through school together.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all of the Hansford girls, they were all related to us because their daddy, Mr. Lee Hansford,
Mm-hmm.
and my granddaddy, daddy, were brothers.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you know, everybody in Seaford was related to each other.
We had the same thing going on down there because Captain Baker owned that end of Seaford. He was giving everybody lots, kept the family building houses together and all. So, yeah.
Well, how come, like, okay, how did, like, I know my grandfather, your great-grandfather, Captain C. Crockett, how did he even get into the seafood business? Because wasn't he vice president of Yorktown
He was one of the founding fathers of Yorktown National,
Bank?
but he was already in the seafood business.
And then it became first Central Fidelity, and then now it's Wachovia. I mean, that's what
It's Wells Fargo now.
Well, Wells Fargo. Yeah, was Wachovia.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a prominent businessman. I mean, you know, he was.
But how
fit to
come
be in
mom
position.
how come mom and daddy lived there all those years? Because Clarence and David grew up in that house. Why did they stay there? Do you know?
Well, financially, your daddy was never able to build a house. She was given the lot where the brick house is.
Right, I know.
But they could never.
And I know he worked the water, and then he became an electrician.
Electrician, right. And
then my grandmother got sick.
Do you know? And I ain't.
Oh, I know. I was just.
I ain't
curious.
trying to cut
No,
you
but I
off.
mean, no. I'd like to the answers to these questions because I didn't know.
I just thought of this. Do you know anything about the factory, the fish factory that was on Goodwin Island? So that was all gone before you know anything.
Well, I know that my dad lived there.
that was the Westcott side of the family.
Right, my dad lived there, and when he was 4 years old. That was like 1916. He lived there, and his dad was like watchman.
It was not there when I was working down at the fish house.
And
I think Wesley's and Jerry Mills. I think that fish house took the place of the one that was on Goodwin Island, and I think it got wiped out in 33.
During the storm of
Okay,
33.
very well could have. Yeah.
I remember pictures of all those boats up here at the end
Oh
of the
yeah,
road.
yeah,
And the sandbox was already cut through from
yes.
what you remember.
yes.
Because it was a point coming out there. in
I
the
know
beginning.
that. I know that. And we used to go through the sandbox every morning, and we had to, and it would be dark, and Locke would get up on the front of the boat, and with a flashlight, and guide my daddy through every morning, especially on a low tide.
Yeah. I've been through there many a time.
Me too.
Who was the lady that lived with Mama and Daddy? I mean, with them, that was kind of like, she lived with them and helped cook and all that stuff.
Lee.
And
That was one of
Granddaddy built her a house up here on,
the black lady from up on Lewis Drive.
and
The Pollard family.
and he built her a house.
The Pollard family and the Cams. All of the Cam family, who later became the Washington family, that lived right there on Seaford Road. They all worked for C.E. Crockett.
Did you know Brooks that worked at the
Oh,
crab
yes.
house at the state dock?
Oh yes.
He was my buddy.
Yeah.
Where was he?
John Brooks.
Where was his family from? Was he right here at Lewis or?
All right. You know where Lewis Drive is?
Yeah.
All right. There's a white house built back in the woods. Mr. John Brooks had a house right there.
Okay.
It was out on the road there. And then he had sisters that
He
Lee
was my
and-
buddy.
yeah.
But I didn't know where he lived or anything because I was real young then.
yeah.
I started working on the boat with Dad when I was 6 years old. So,
Well,
and
I
Casey
was 4 or
worked
5
there.
when I started.
But I know Casey lived up where Kroger is now. On the, you remember where Sally's sandwich shop was? He lived right around in there.
Yeah, I remember all that area up there. And see, my daddy was like a fishmonger. And they would have fish left over. They'd pack out a truck.
Yeah.
And we'd get back to the dock along about 1 o'clock, and he'd pack out the truck. And then we used to take them up to Tappahannock. We'd catch the ferry at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Yorktown and go up 17 to Tappahannock, and we meet another truck that was going to Baltimore and unload our fish. and then come back. And we had to be back to Yorktown by 9:30 because the last boat across was at 9:30. And that's where I learned to drive. My daddy used to put me, we had this little box truck.
Yeah.
And he'd put me in his lap and I'd sit on the end and drive down 17.
So this was before, y'all are going to think this is a stupid question, but there was no bridge. Y'all had to take the ferry.
There was no bridge.
52.
Yep.
Well, I didn't know.
Yep.
They were shoveling sand off of York Point, hauling it down there to mix the concrete to build the bridge, and to do the mortar for Zion Church. Edward Gibbs, but I think Joe Gibbs had the trucks and all before Edward, and they would drive right out on York Point Beach and load them with a shovel. Daddy did that for him for a while, some.
Yeah.
And James and Herbert, my uncles, they helped lay the bricks on Zion.
Well, now, and I remember your granddaddy,
Ellis.
Worked down at Reggie's.
Yeah.
And worked at the fish house some. Used to work down at the crab house and all. He was, you know. Well, he's the one that my daddy came from Fox Hill up here.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Granddaddy, they had a fish camp too in Grandview.
Yep.
But him and another gentleman had a contract to run a boat named the Pilot. It was like a big deck boat, about 60 foot long or something.
Oh, okay.
And you know how they used to do the crab scraps and all in Hampton?
Oh, yes.
And you'd smell everything.
Oh, yeah. I'm very familiar with that.
There was a factory right there on Chisholm Creek, just past Wiley's Railway, and they had a contract bringing all the crab scraps to that factory there, and that's where they were making chicken feed and fertilizer and all that. And that was in 1912 that my grandmother met him, my grandfather, because her and her sisters would go over to that crab factory, you know, see what was going on, and maybe they did a little job there or something and hung out there. But that's how they met. And then in 1913, that's when her and my granddad got married. So that's how he ended up down here. But
Yep.
Did you know much about Captain Baker Lee?
I just knew him to see him,
Okay.
you know. And we used to go down there and get vegetables because he farmed.
Yeah.
And Miss Viola, before she married Mr. Wise. They lived across the street from the Gibbses.
She was my great aunt.
Yep. We were all, you know, every summer we go get vegetables and all down there.
Well, it's been told that Captain Baker had built a deck boat named the Lizzie Sue. And I hadn't been told any of that, but it's been said, you know, in the last few years, that's become known apparently, but I don't know anything about that. So
No, I don't either.
So
And they're saying that my granddaddy owned the boat, the Marion J.
I've heard of the Marion J.
yeah.
I've never heard of her.
Well,
David and Clarence were talking about the Marion J.
Yeah, I
and
know the
even
Marion
my
J.
aunt. Well, I
But
thought
they had her over in Guinea when I knew of her.
Okay. But they say my granddaddy bought her after he had the kingfish. But
You very well could have.
it could have, but it would have been when I was in college.
All right. Now, something I'm very interested in. Do you know anything about people that were building boats down here?
Yes.
All right. What can you tell me about that?
Johnny Belvin. Old man John
Oh,
Belvin.
yeah. He built my daddy's boat.
Yeah, well,
in the
he built
50s.
my bateau.
Yeah.
I had a little boat called the Norma.
They called him Big Daddy. The family did.
Yes.
But Daddy always called him Old Man Johnny.
Yep, that's what we called him. And he built those boats. And then his son, Enos,
Yeah.
continued to build. And then Enos had two boys,
Johnny.
Johnny and Dickie and Barbara, I think her name was. She lives in Williamsburg. But anyway, they were boat builders, and they built several bateau-like boats. They built the Elsie, which was Hudson's boat. Had a big 35 Everoo. We thought we were fastest boat on the creek.
Yeah.
And it would hardly get up and down the creek. Of course, I had the little Norma. She was 14 foot, and for years I only had oars. I could go as far as the end of the cove. My daddy, he said, "Don't you dare go in that creek." I could hear him now. But then he got me a little 2 horsepower motor, and then he said, "Okay, you can go as far as the fish house, but don't you go past the fish house." And I got caught many a time.
Oh boy.
Yes, those guys at the fish house would call Mother and say, "She just went round the bend."
You were heading to Claxon Creek, won't you?
Either there or over to Captain John's. I used to go over there and visit with Dickie and Johnny and all that much. And Francis Hepner, he was over there. But
then
then
Jim Riggins' father, Bodie Riggins' grandfather, he was building the boats over there because he built 3 of their boats. Right there on the shore.
And then Captain Thomas.
Arthur Thomas,
Arthur Thomas built boats.
And then over here on my street, Sparrow, he was building boats over there. Do you remember?
No, the only one Jimmy Sparrow built his.
Right, but who were we talking about?
W.H.
Yeah.
William.
It's
Evangeline's dad.
Evangeline's dad, I think, was W.H., and they had Sparrow Oyster Company.
And they
you know
built
anything
boats
about
back there
that?
behind Evangeline's house.
But
well, I don't remember any big boats being built over there.
Right. Okay.
I mean, Howard, William H. is William Howard. Howard was into the oystering transportation seafood business. By the time Wendell and I are about the same age. I'm actually a year older than Wendell.
Okay. Well, I'm supposed to talk to Wendell.
Yeah, he's supposed to. I got him Wendell's.
Okay.
I saw Wendell at church.
Yeah. So, but they always ran their business either out of somewhere up on the Northern Neck, because mainly that's what their oystering business was.
Right.
And he took the northern route. He transported his to Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and that area. And Bernie.
You talking about Hudson doing?
No, now that was Howard.
Okay. All right.
And then Bernie was his older brother, and he started his own WB, William Bernard. And he had an office in Hampton, and he had an office up in Whitestone. And he got its truck and all, and Harold White, Harold and Hudson, when Hudson came home from the Navy in 46, 47, because he was in North Africa when I was born. And Hudson and Harold began driving what was called the Green Hornet, because it was an old Peterbilt green. I mean, it was huge. It was not this little one that was, not this Kenworth. It was before that. It wasn't it was an auto car.
Okay.
And they would pick up oysters in Hampton and fish, and then they'd go to Whitestone and load out of actually my daddy's first cousin, Verlander's. And then they would leave there Monday night, go to Nashville, Tennessee, and Kroger. They had the Kroger and the Piggly Wiggly franchises in Nashville. They made one stop from the time they left Whitestone till they got to they stopped in Knoxville and unloaded some, and then they unloaded in Nashville. And then there was a nursery and a building supply company. And if they were sending anything east, they'd pick up whatever load they could, and they'd bring it back. And they would get back here on Thursday night. And Hudson down here, he loved that truck driving.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he did it as long as he could until the two girls, and he built the house, and business was slow. We were going into the Korean War, and he went to work. Jimmy Hartley got him a job at Fort Eustis too, after my daddy went over there. And then he got the opportunity to go to what was called Skiff's Creek before the Korean War, because that was the nuclear plant for the Navy. And he went to Skiff's Creek, and he retired out of Skiff's Creek. But it's the day after he retired, he was right back on the Green Hornet.
Oh boy!
With Bernie Sparrow, and Raymond Sparrow would go with him. There was a man from Poquoson, Jimmy. I want to say Hunt, but I'm not sure of that. But anyway, Gerald Ray Hopkins would go some, but different ones would go with him. Elsie and I went with him a couple times. But, you know, they run that. And then, of course, he went to work driving the bus for Newton.
Yeah, he drove that. I remember that was so exciting. He'd bring that Newton bus home.
Oh, yeah.
From, he'd be getting ready to go on a trip or something. He'd bring that thing down the road, and that thing was huge, and he'd bring her down here and turn down this road, and I'd be out in the yard like, oh, this is so exciting, and I'd go down there, and he'd let me get on it and look at it, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you know Dabney Hudgens?
Oh,
Yes.
I did.
Yes, because Dabney Hudgens married Miss Bertha, who was sister to my granddaddy's. She was in the Mills family that Julia Mills married and all, and Ann Coley and Miss Bertha and all them. They were all related on the Hansford side of the family. Yeah, I knew Dabney quite well.
Well, he was supposed to have built a dead rise in their backyard. Do you know anything about that?
Seems to me I remember something
And I
about
think what is his granddaughter Gail?
Gail.
Acres.
I remember going to visit him.
I think it was supposed to be called the Miss Gail or something.
Yep.
I remember
You
going
remember
to
him
visit.
building that?
I remember him building. Yeah, I remember something about that in the backyard, and of course his Aunt Coley's son-in-law, Skeets,
Yeah, I knew Skeets.
run
Had the
the
barber shop.
at the barber shop. Yeah. Well, see, Miss Bertha and Aunt Coley and Elizabeth and Bertha were sisters. So Aunt Coley was Bertha's mother, and she had a boy, Billy, who was a musician, a pianist. Went to New York, played in all the big musicals up there. Yeah, I remember something. I can remember something about a boat in the backyard there.
Okay.
But Gail probably could tell
Yeah,
you.
Gail.
I'm supposed to talk to her sometime.
Yeah,
So-
she lives right across the street from Wes.
I know.
remember going with Daddy over there to visit Dabney, because
Yeah.
Daddy was really close friends with Dabney, and we used to go see him over there at the house there.
Yeah.
And you were talking about riding around with fish. I know here at Seaford, Joe Hansford, he would go fish his gill nets, and then he'd ride around Seaford and sell his fish.
We never sold any.
Yeah.
We used to go. We go up Lewis Drive, then we go up to. It was called the Oak Tree. It was behind. It's where the. It was before Sally's sandwich shop. It was. You went out onto 17, and there was a big oak tree, and there was a little place there, and we'd go there on Saturday mornings or Friday afternoons, and Daddy would give it away. And then we'd go to Slabtown.
Yeah, I know where that's at.
Yep.
What was Slabtown?
It was behind the
Down at Yorktown, where the battlefields are on the left,
behind the cemetery,
where you can cut through to go to 17.
Goosley Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, but instead of turning left, you turned right and went down in there and came around to where the old tour road is.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is totally off the talking about this, but y'all are talking about those places. What you probably, I know you remember this, or you, one of y'all, the house that sits past the cemetery by Zion. What did that used to be, like a liquor house or something?
Yeah, it was a shot house.
A shot house.
There were 3 of them on Seaford Road.
What, who owns it? Why has no one ever lived in that?
The
They just always cut the grass, and it's ever
the
since
old man that
I remember little, that house is set empty.
it was a 2-story house there, and it burned, and they moved a Copeland Park house in there, like the 2 across the street.
And
From-
like Brooke's house that she lives in, that was Betty's
Right,
mother-in-law,
exactly.
Tank's mom.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway, that house burned, and the old woman died, but she had like 3 sons, and the guy that owns it now is probably in his 80s. He's like a great grandson, and he's like the only one left. And he lives in New Jersey, and he used to come down and spend a couple weeks in the summer, but he's not able to do that. And he has somebody through the Black family, through the church, that maintains that little house.
I mean, as long as I can remember, it's been empty, and
I don't think they can get a clear deed to it. I don't think they can get a clearance enough to sell it. See, there was that little house, it was a 2-story house, and then across the street where the pond is,
right.
there were 2 houses, 2-story houses that were Black families. And when they rebuilt Seaford Road, they tore those down, and the Smith family had lived in one of them, and they built the house across the street before you get to Brooke's house. There was a little prefab house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the daughter lives in the house behind the 2-story house now.
Yeah.
I can remember old Seaford Road. I remember
yeah.
when they built the new one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway.
I've just always wondered why no one ever lived there, and they used to keep it up really good, and I've noticed lately it hasn't been, it's like the bushes are growing up around it.
Well, I noticed that it's not the same guy cutting the grass. It's a younger group there tending to it, and they evidently are not managing it as well as the old.
I can remember old Goodwin Neck too.
Oh, yeah.
The roads were a little different back then.
You remember Dandy? You remember the road going into Dandy?
Pretty somewhat, yeah.
You had to go up to Waterview,
Mm-hmm.
and where Waterview and Hornsbyville come together, you went straight ahead, and it went right down through the middle of the refinery. And
No,
so,
I don't remember that.
all right,
No.
when I used to ride the school bus, we went to Dandy to pick up, and we went up, went down, went around the loop in Dandy and come back out. So when the oil refinery bought the land, they closed the road up, and the only way to get to Dandy was by boat.
Wow.
So so they built the new road,
Yeah.
Goodwin Neck.
Were students driving the buses back then?
Oh, yeah.
No, yeah, Ray told me
I know
some
Ray
stories.
Bircher and a bunch of them used to drive the bus.
Billy Moreland?
Well, they were older than you, but
Yeah, Ray said that they used to have student drivers when he did it, and they used to take, he was
Okay.
on one,
Oh, yeah.
went to Botac, and they took the governor off of it, and they were racing down 17, down the interstate or something, and they got caught, and they all got in trouble, and then he
Oh,
said,
yeah.
one of them threw lighter fluid or something down the aisle and lit it, and then him and, what was his name, Huckabee, Keith Huckabee?
Mike Huckabee?
No, not Mike. Now, Mike's the older one.
Yeah,
Mike,
Keith.
Keith.
They were sitting on the bus, and Ray said they were sitting there together, and they were messing around, and Ray had a pocket knife, and he was playing around with the pocket knife and said something to, yeah, you turn around and I'll poke you with. I don't know. They were, back then.
They were bad boys.
He said that Keith Huckabee turned around and Ray had the pocket knife out like that, and he turned around like that, and that pocket knife went right through Keith Huckabee's cheek and hit his teeth and all that. All that stuff that went on, I was like, y'all would be in jail if any of that went on in school buses. Having a pocket knife on a bus.
Do you remember anything about Michael Huckabee?
Oh, yes.
Had a V-stern dead rise named Virginia.
And couldn't see as far as from here to that door.
I hear that. He would go patting tongue and clams.
Yep.
And,
yep.
Because he was down there when I started working with Daddy and everything.
He was something else.
Uh-huh.
There's some nuts and some...
I just want some water. Is he the one, Ray told me, was it Keith Huckabee or was it one of them that...
Tally was the oldest.
Ray hung around with some of them that had to have their bed made up every day. Do you remember who that was? Was it Keith Huckabee? Was it Dan? It was some of them that Ray hung at. It was the Huckabee, Danny Flannery.
Oh, then that Flannery you're getting into.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
his
anyway,
family.
Well, anyway, Ray said, whoever it was, he said they could go over to his house and it would be 9:00 at night. And if his bed hadn't been made up, for some reason his mom hadn't made his bed up, she had to go in there and make the bed up before he would get in.
Well, that ain't Danny, I can tell you that.
Oh, Lord, no.
No, Ray was best friends with Danny.
Uh-huh.
That was his best friend.
I know. I remember them. They built choppers together.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
We were
Ray
over there
built
the-
his tea bucket back then.
We were over there the day he died.
I taught all that bunch my first and
I
second
don't
year
remember
of
who
teaching.
that was that had to have his bed made up. Ray told me. And then Ray told me about one night they were over here at Teagle's.
Oh, yes.
Teagle's out here at the end of our street. And he said that Duty, well, they were, that was a crew. And he said that somebody, he was telling me because Ray knows all those car years and all that kind of stuff. And somebody was had pulled into Duty's and pulled up behind Duty's and had these bright lights on. And Duty said, don't you ride behind me again like that with those bright lights on. And so he said they took off and he was in the car with Duty. And that whoever it was pulled out behind him, had those bright lights on. And he said, next thing you know, they stopped at the stoplight. And he said, Duty got out. And the other car stopped behind him, whoever it was.
Well, no stoplights in Seaford.
Well, I mean,
then.
stop sign. Stop sign, I'm sorry. Duty got out, reached in the back of the back seat of his car, and he had a bat, grabbed it, went back there, and beat both of the headlights out of the car behind. And the guy was like, what are you doing? He said, I told you not to ride behind me with those headlights on.
Duty was a big boy. He could get away with a lot, probably.
He did. And Jeff was Duty's cohort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was the biggest thing to happen in Seaford while you were growing up?
Oh, my gosh.
What's your most memorable event?
Me.
Oh, boy.
Probably Hazel, the hurricane, because that was my first remembrance of hurricanes and how severe they could be.
Right.
And that was in 54. And it did a lot of water damage, but it didn't do a lot of structural damage.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing Daddy used to always tell me about, which a lot of people claim they don't know nothing about it, but for World War II, the Army brought a bunch of tanks and
No, see,
trucks
now that's
and
way
stuff.
before my
Oh, I
time.
know it's before your time, but they went down the end of Seaford Road and they went all over York Point and all over there practicing and training and in that terrain and all of that, and camped out there for, I don't know, a couple weeks or something. And he would go down, he lived right there, he would walk down there where they were, and they'd let him ride in the tank with them or sit there and eat with them, or, you know, he hung out with them while they were down there.
Yeah.
And so, and I've told other people that, they're like, I don't know nothing about that.
And then probably the next biggest thing was when Reggie's burnt down.
Yeah.
I heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wasn't
Yeah.
around, but I've heard stories.
Yeah, when I was growing up, you went down Seaford Road as far as Mr. Wally's, and the next thing was Mr. Ellis Holston's old little house, and then all the way down to Charlie and Margaret Withrow's, which was the big white house at the end.
Right.
There was nothing
Right.
to the right. York Point Road was a dirt road about this wide.
Mm-hmm.
And the fire marshal from the city of Newport News had a cottage down there. And other than that, there was nothing down there. I mean, I remember when York Point was built.
Mm-hmm.
When they blew the
dug the canals.
Dug
and
the
everything.
canals.
Who owned York Point? That land? Somebody told me that.
Hazelwood. He was an he was an investor out of Williamsburg.
Somebody told me that our grandfather owned. Well, my
No, he
grandfather.
owned Crockett Road.
And way back, I mean, before the turn of the century probably, or at the turn of the century maybe, like Bay Tree, all that marsh,
Yeah.
a lot of that was pasture land.
Yeah.
And they had cattle and cows grazing out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but it's become marsh where it was actual land. So.
Well, my parents were good friends with Charlie and Margaret Withrow that lived down there in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she built 3 more houses going down Bay Tree, and they had one cottage over on the waterfront.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only thing down there, and there was a gate right there at the curve.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't go no farther than there.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to go, my daddy and I used to go down there and meet Mr. Charlie, and we'd go duck hunting late in the afternoons over on the pond. Black duck hunting.
Yeah. That my granddad had a double barrel 10 gauge shotgun, and it was a long barrel, it was a goose gun.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy said they used to go down York Point and they would come back with a wheelbarrow full of duck where they'd been duck hunting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so.
And there's a deep hole down there that they used to walk back there and get great big oysters and everything, wash tubs full of oysters.
But you had to know where you were going, because I was always told, don't you go this way or that way, because there's quicksand over here and there's quicksand over here, and there's only one little path to get to the deep hole.
Mm-hmm. And they had oyster grounds on Claxton Creek and Cabin Creek.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So there's
Yep.
a lot of history.
Oh, yes. Yes, there is.
And, you know, during the wars, there was submarine nets out there and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I remember we drove through the island and saw the pylons from the submarine net. Well, the pylons from it. Daddy used to take me through
I
there.
can't get over how Goodwin's Island has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
That
It used to
end
be
part.
It used to be a great big tall forest
yeah.
with a lot of trees and all.
Mm.
Have you noticed at the end of Goodwin Island, the very end, like off roast meats on the back side of it? And it used to be, that was all connected, and now it's like that little spit on the end.
It keeps eroding.
It keeps eroding, and you can almost go take your boat through that part now.
Mm.
It's like,
Well, I haven't really been out there around it since Isabel. They said that's what really changed it.
well, I know in the last few years, it's really changed on that very tip on the end.
Lord, I can't remember the last time I was in a boat out there.
We'll have to take
boy.
you out.
Yeah. I know it.
We sold our boat when we came back here.
We have a boat
In
sitting over there
82.
on the-
So I've been at the creek since 82.
Good Lord, we need to take you out.
Yeah. I know it. You need to get out there. Get some of that fresh salt air and salt water.
I get all I need right here. Because
Boy.
after I had my son, I suffered with seasickness.
Oh boy. But look,
I never got seasick a day in my life until after Ashby was born.
I know you do not miss the oil refinery one bit.
No.
And when I was little, I remember huge mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Man, they were something. They could pick you up and carry you away.
I remember when growing up, and we didn't have a dryer or nothing, and we had to hang everything out. And Mama kept a thing hanging in the garage, that little bag with her clothespins in it and a rag. And we would go out there to hang clothes up, and you had to wipe the clothesline off because of the stuff
black
from the oil refinery, the soot.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a big ditch past my granddad's house. A lot of that drained over to Cabin Creek. And we would walk that ditch and pick asparagus.
We used to pick asparagus down
We
here.
used to pick it all the way down.
Yeah, down here. I used to go pick asparagus down there.
Grandma would make a big pot of asparagus and dumplings.
Oh, yes.
Mm.
Yes.
And then we'd pick blackberries. She'd make a big blackberry cobbler.
Yeah.
Oh boy, it was on then.
I
Yeah.
remember Aunt Elsie was always cooking something over at her house.
And she
Yep.
didn't have a toaster, but I would spend the night with them different times. And every morning when I spent the night, she'd cook me a nice breakfast, and she would
Toasted under the broiler in the oven.
Well, she toasted in the skillet,
Yeah.
Oh,
a
okay.
cast iron skillet, like a grilled cheese
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
But it was just a toast.
Mama used to run hers in the
Mm.
under the broiler.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mama did too. We had Texas toast.
Mm.
Do you remember when David caught the kitchen on fire at our house? Mama talking about they went to church, and just like she said, they would cook. Like Mama had cooked her roast, or she left it in the oven while we went to church
Right.
and had it cooking. And so then when we got home, she had butter beans. This is what she said. I mean, I might not be remembering this right, but she had left butter beans on the stove cooking, right? And she told David, of course, he didn't go to church that morning or something, to turn the butter beans down like in a half an hour or something, so that when we got home from church, the roast would be done, the butter beans would be done, whatever. And instead of turning them down, he turned them up.
Mm.
And all of a
And the
sudden,
pan caught on fire.
yes, and all of a sudden we're in church, and the fire trucks come in or something, and I was little, and it was our kitchen. David had caught the kitchen on fire. I remember that. Because we had those knotty pine cabinets and all that. No, I barely remember that.
The whole family would gather at Grandma and Granddad's house on Sunday.
Oh, yes.
And she'd have a big wash pan full of banana pudding every Sunday. And she would be at the picnic table cleaning fish, like you had said. But when she was opening oysters, all of us little kids would line up, and we would take
Eat the
turns
crabs.
eating the pea crab. Yep.
Mhm. Yep. We
Uh-huh.
did that too.
Yeah.
Nanny had an outdoor fireplace in the backyard that she had a board that covered the top. I don't think it ever had a fire in it, but that's where she cleaned fish.
Mhm.
Yeah. And chicken.
Yeah.
She'd go up to Mr. Edlow's and get the chicken and bring it home, and she'd heat that boiling pot of water and dip those chicken in it and pull the
didn't-
feathers.
She didn't kill them like
No, he killed them before she brought them home.
my Edna,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
my grandma, your great grandma.
Yeah. Grandma. She was grandma.
Here's grandma.
Mhm.
Isn't that weird that she was my grandmother, but her great grandmother, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's because
Because of my mom.
some people showed up a little later.
And sometimes, growing up, I've thought about it's been a curse and it's been a blessing and everything, but it's like I wish I could have known them, and that's why I love hearing all this stuff, and I ask all these questions and all this because I just never got to know him. I mean, he died a month. Mama said, this is what Mama told me, and I don't know, you might know if this is true because it's all from just hearsay. I was born February 6th. He died March 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that he got up that morning and came and sat at the breakfast table.
I don't doubt that.
And then he died that day.
Yeah,
And
He had been sick though for a long
Right,
time.
but she said he got up and came and sat at the breakfast table that morning,
Mhm.
and then he died that day. And then my grandmother died in 1958. That she had some kind of thing on her neck, and they took her to Richmond and they operated on her. And David,
Thyroid.
well, David said, okay, it's come from David, and you got to understand, anything comes from David. He said she had a tumor or something on the back or the side of her neck, and they took her to Richmond and they operated on her, and she was never the same, and that's what killed her.
That's right.
That's what David said.
That's right. Yep.
And he said it was cancer or something.
It was. Yeah. It was thyroid cancer,
Mm.
which runs in the family.
I remember when I was little, they used to talk about if somebody had cancer and that they would do exploratory surgery, and they used to complain and say that every time they open that up and stir that up,
Right, her
then
ear got to
ain't
it.
no time they're gone, you know.
Well, didn't people used to come to her for
Yeah,
cancer
That's what I
stuff?
was going to say. See, Miss Edna,
She was known
Grandma, as
for
we called her,
her
she
potions.
developed some kind of an herb salve,
Yeah.
and it was called black salve.
Mm-hmm.
And the dermatologist in Richmond would send people to her to put that black salve on to cure skin cancers.
Mm-hmm.
And she got it from an Indian.
Yes, yes,
And Mama hated all that stuff.
yeah.
Because there was a fish box in our garage that was back in the corner, and I was in it one day looking through it, and it was all this like old stuff and recipes and all this. It was like,
She was known as the medicine lady.
right, and it was her old stuff.
She used
And
to-
Mama was like, get out of that, leave that alone. Because Mama was also, didn't want anything to do with any of that stuff. She didn't like any of that kind of stuff.
Well, I was telling her and Linda and Evangeline the other day that if you started getting a cold, Grandma, she would take lard and put a little sugar in it and put some drops of kerosene in it and stir it up, and you'd eat that, and that would help knock that cough down.
And my daddy, his Fox Hill cure, as he called it, was we had to eat an onion.
Uh-huh.
When we got the least little bit symptom of a head cold or anything, we need to cut her up an onion, make her eat that onion raw. Put a little sugar on it.
And I believe that would help you.
Well, I was telling him when we were talking to Evangeline that I heard the story. You can correct me. I'm sure it's not right because I've heard it through David, whatever. That I guess it was my grandfather. They were out fishing and they caught a stingray or ray, and they got it in the boat, and the tail of it went through his leg, and they cut it off so it was just sticking out and got him in, but they poured kerosene on it on the way in to, like, I guess
Kill the infection.
yeah, and then pulled it out, or Dr.
Powell pulled it out.
Pulled it out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I got it right.
Oh yeah, Dr. Powell he did everything.
He had a Rocket 88 Oldsmobile that he had bought new, and he had drove it for I don't know how long, and he took it downtown somewhere and traded it in on a new car, and Daddy heard about that, and Daddy ran right down there and bought that car right then, and he used to race that car up and down Seaford.
Yep.
He loved that car. He talked about that all the time.
Yep.
And it was stock. All he did was put dual exhaust on it. And Bill Forrest and Picosin had the same year, same car, but he had completely built his and bored it out and had 2 4-barrel, did everything you could do to him, and Daddy could pull him fast as he could go. And Bill Forrest had told me that himself. So when Daddy was here patting tongue clams, he'd come in the evenings and load the clams in the truck, and he would stop by the house because he would sell them to Bill Forrest and Picosin. So he would stop by the house and pick me up, and I'd go with him. And when we got there, I would get up I was just a little thing. I wasn't even 6 years old yet. I was like 4 or 5 maybe. But I would get up in the back of the truck and I would drag the bags to the back of the truck and help them unload them. And so Bill Forrestman paid Daddy cash for the clams every day, and he'd pay Daddy for the clams, and then he'd hand me $2 for working, you know, for helping unload them.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. We did a whole lot of things.
Oh yeah.
Do you
Had
remember
an
the
uncle.
boat? Do you remember the boat that we had, that green one named Sandra Kay? Do you know who built her or where she came from?
Mm-mm.
But you don't know anything about anybody else in Seaford building any boats or anything that you can think of.
Nope.
Okay. Because one thing I'm interested in all Seaford history, but right now I'm building a memorial to the Dead Rise builders, and I'm gonna do a wall piece of like a 4-foot wall for each area to recognize their builders. So I'm trying to collect all that now so I can start putting that together. So I already built the main piece. I've got the bow of a Dead Rise mounted, and it's all sanded down and varnished so you can see how each board's cut, how they're put together. And I cut the side boards out of one side, the starboard side, so you can look in and you can see the keel inside and the ribs, and you know, so
My
now,
daddy could pick out a Johnny Belvid built boat no matter where we were.
Mhm.
He'd say,
yeah,
there goes a Johnny Belvid boat.
yeah, yeah. If you pretty much learn, each builder had their own little techniques and styles and things, so you can pretty much do it with any builder if you're around
Grover
enough
Lee.
of them.
Wasn't he known for the round star? Didn't he have
Mr. Arthur Thomas built, the boy that lived next door, Jimmy Hogg, a boat, a pleasure boat. We called it the Worrywart. That was the name of it. And it had one of these just a square window block type thing across the front of it.
He built the Perry Lynn for Arthur Perry.
Yeah, he did.
And he built Dabney Hudgens, like it was like an 18 or 20 foot Dead Rise bateau he had. And he built quite a few boats.
Yeah, he did.
And I've gotten with Philip, Captain Arthur's grandson, Philip Miller now.
Greg?
And he had a lot of pictures, and he
Oh, I'm
shared
sure
them
he
with
did.
me. And so I've scanned them all in. I know you probably don't do any Facebook, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you do?
I keep up with everything that's going on with you and
Oh,
the,
you do?
and the boat.
Well,
building.
you've seen the pictures. I put them on Workboat Life.
Yeah.
The ones that Philip had and
Yeah.
all that.
I saw them.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
I hear that. So, and that's what I'd like to do with them, you know. So, because they're fastened in there, the way I can do it is scan the whole page a section at a time, and then I can crop it down to the pictures. Takes a little more to do it that way, but because if I stand here and try to take pictures, the shadows and all,
I know, I took
you can't
some.
do it.
To take yesterday when we had the family gathering, and they don't show up.
I know. So if you don't mind, I would like to do that, and I can promise you, it'll come back to you the same way it leaves. I've done it with a lot of families' pictures, and I hadn't had a problem yet. So